Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. We're here for another episode of Monk Chat. So your opportunity to ask any questions related to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha or around those lines to the current monastics present. So I have here Bhante Sudaso to my right and Tanjagaro to my left, and I'm Ayasoma. And I see a few questions already online. So Sadhu asks, do any of you have children? If not, was it difficult to renounce the desire to have children? Tanjagaro?
I don't have any children, at least children that I know I'm aware of. And if not, was it difficult to renounce the desire to have children? So this is actually a good question. So one of the more recent relationships I had before I pursued monasticism, I actually started to think about that question seriously. Like, do I actually want to have children? And part of that, actually, I realized that my interest in having a family and children was actually not very high, and that's actually part of the reason I was trying to put together clues that maybe I should explore monasticism, because I was like, I'm actually not interested in having a family. So that was my experience.
Awesome, thank you, Bhante. I don't have children, and I'm definitely aware of that. I'm 100% sure. And it was not difficult to renounce the desire, because I had no desire actually to have children. So that was, that was actually, quite simple. Actually, it was quite bizarre when people would ask me, why didn't I have children? I was like, why would I? So I think it was perfect condition for monastic life. Bhante Sudaso?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually noticed that there's a tendency, people who want children tend to just naturally assume that everybody else in the world also wants to have children, and are often puzzled by the fact that a substantial number of people have zero interest, which is my case. I was never the least bit interested in having children. So for me, there was nothing to renounce. I just never was interested. So yes, as far as I know, I also don't have any children, and I hope it continues to be that way.
Yeah. Okay. Can you name any things you miss about lay life? Tanjagaro?
Right now, let's see, is there anything I miss about lay life? I guess one thing that popped in my head was, and I don't know why this popped in my head, it was like just the ability to just go into the refrigerator and just get something. And I was thinking, well, that's kind of a strange thing, but I realized it means something larger. It's like, okay, like getting a sandwich from the refrigerator, okay, like, but what does that mean? It's like, oh, there's this. It's actually interesting being a monastic, and just like, for example, being in a monastery and trying to just take care of the monastery or do things. It can be a surprising amount of complication involved. And as a layperson, sometimes you just can just do it, and I think there's part of the monastic life is very attractive because of its simplicity, right? But it's interesting that trying to make a monastery work, let's say in their kind of, let's say in the current environment, sometimes it can be quite complicated. And I think the other venerables can probably speak to this as well. So I think there's a kind of like a desire just being able to just like, just get it done. I know how to get it done. So that's kind of, I think that's.
Thank you, Bhante. Bhante Sudaso?
Is there anything I miss about lay life? No. No, I love being a monk. When I think about lay life, I think about suffering. So I'm actually quite happy that part of my life is over.
Is there anything I miss about lay life? Actually, there is one thing that I miss, which is a little bit awkward. I miss going to the opera. It was this thing that I really like to do by myself. I know. It was my thing in Manhattan. I used to like to do it. Yeah, it was me and like my 80-year-old friends that literally it was they were a little bit on the older side, but really actually cool, eccentric people. And then they would always bring me backstage. Back then I was a little younger, so they were really happy to see me there. And I kind of actually really miss that. It's a little bit odd, but yeah, that's one of the things that I would say I miss. Also, the opera is really good. Maria Callas is great. Are you allowed to eat eggs?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the tradition. So in Theravada, yes. Mahayana, no.
Actually, that's a good point. I think in East Asian Mahayana, eggs are considered meat and are, yeah.
I recently was cooking for a pair of lamas in Tibetan, and they were eating eggs and breakfast every morning.
So the Tibetan Buddhism, they don't follow the rules on vegetarianism. So
No.
it's just in East Asian Mahayana, they do, but in Tibet, they don't. And in Theravada, we just don't have any rules about vegetarianism. Well, we do have some, namely we can't eat raw meat, and we can't eat meat if the animal was killed specifically for us. But that's a very specific kind of restriction.
Oh, and Laura says, I want to make some brownies for the Sangha, but I don't know if I'm allowed to prepare them with eggs. Oh,
That's very sweet.
Modena. It's very sweet. And Hasanta says, the 12-fold nexus has Sankara, then Vijnana, then Rupa, then eventually Vedana. 5 khandas has 4, then 7, then 2, then 3. I'm confused why the order differs. Please explain.
So one thing that's important to keep in mind when looking at the different frameworks that the Buddha offers for investigating our experience is that while most of these frameworks are self-complete, they don't necessarily map very nicely onto each other. So if you take the 5 khandas by itself, it's a beautiful, simple, complete description of a sentient being. If you take the 6 sense bases, again, a complete description of a sentient being. If you take the 6 elements, again, complete description of a sentient being. But they are different ways of describing a sentient being. So they don't necessarily line up perfectly or neatly with each other. And the 12-fold nexus, as you call it, I assume by this you mean paticca samuppada, what's normally translated dependent origination. I like 12-fold nexus. That's very cute. I don't think I've seen that before. So it's actually not a description of a sentient being in totality, but rather it's a description of the causal process through which experience comes into being, and in particular, how the delusional, self-centered experience of an unawakened being manifests. And why things are in their particular order that they are in Paticca Samuppada is, generally speaking, one way of understanding it is that it's starting from the most broad and general and then becoming increasingly specific. So it starts with avidya, so ignorance, this very broad general thing. And then from that, it gradually refines. So then there's sankharas, so separate objects, the sense of distinctions between things. And there's consciousness, the sense of I am conscious of that. So I am this object aware of that object. And then it's like, well, what is this I that I think I am? Well, I am this body mind, this nama rupa. And what is this nama rupa? Oh, it's the 6 senses. What are these 6 senses experiencing? They're experiencing Vedana. So you can see how it's a gradual increase in specificity. So it becomes increasingly specific and detailed and precise as you work through the sequence. And at some point we start getting in trouble where we start getting into the whole craving and grasping and identity formation part of the sequence. But you can still see here, it's moving from general and broad to specific and detailed. So that's why, in my opinion anyway, that's why it's in the order that it is.
Great, thank you, Bante. And Mary asks, do Buddhists believe in miracles or performing miracles? It's so funny because actually I remember the first time I went to actually Asia as a Buddhist. I had already been to Asia as a non-Buddhist, but as a Buddhist, especially actually when I went to Thailand, like the Theravada country. So I was expecting this whole like sort of, really kind of austere, very minimalistic, a little bit kind of like IMS with monks, sort of idea turned into country. And then you go there and it's like, wow, yeah, it's all over the place. It's basically Italy Buddhist. So yeah, there's like everything. Maybe it's not called miracles, but it's definitely lots of supernatural, let's say, experiences, lots of different, also animism that lives with Buddhism, next to Buddhism, that lives juxtaposed to also Hinduism. So there's lots of, it's actually really alive and well, very, very polyadrical, polyadric, colorful. Yeah, so there's I would say definitely, of course. I think here in the West we tend to have this a little bit more kind of ascetic, scientific, polished. I mean, basically we're a bore. Like we just removed all the fun from Buddhism. But it's I just have this like bland salad, and throughout all these like amazing condiments, it's all over the top. So yeah, pretty much anything Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana in Asia, it's the full deal. And Amaranta says, if I decide to practice with you, how do I have to do? You actually are my Sangha. Amaranta.
How do I have to do, like, how do you do this? Like, how do you come to the monastery? Is that what?
Well,
just
I think that
come to-
Amaranta is in Spain, if I remember correctly.
I think she's
Yes. Oh, in Mexico.
Well,
Are you in Mexico? Or are you in Spain? I remember that you
Well,
were in Spain.
either way, there's two ways. One is to come here to Empty Cloud Monastery. The other is to invite us to wherever you are. Actually, a third option would be to track us down when we're in Europe, which
if
is
you're in Spain.
Yeah. So whichever one of these makes sense to you, send us an email and we'll speak about details. But yeah, we would love to have you come and practice with us.
You're always welcome. And Rick says, Venerables, I've heard teachers say that it is important to develop a healthy sense of self before we let go of the self. Do you have any reflections, Panjagaro?
Sure. I mean, I think this is probably referring to is kind of our maybe the more modern psychological kind of sense of just having a sense of if there's anything that we're particularly distressed by, having difficulty with relationships with others, trying to have some modicum of wellness in our life. That I think that is a useful thing. What I think I kind of come back to is that a lot of times that the way that we talk about self, is maybe while it generally overlaps, like as a Venn diagram, it generally overlaps with translated as atta. I think what the Buddha is referring to, an anatta, often gets translated as not self, is also slightly different. And I think it's worth also keeping in mind that the psychological approaches to well-being is something different than what the Buddha was trying to teach. And so while there may be some, some useful things that both they might offer Buddhist practice, it's also worth keeping in mind that there is a different teaching involved with what the Buddha was trying to convey, and that was, in particular, that there's this possibility of not just, a more well-balanced mind, a more well-adjusted mind, but a complete ending of suffering, a complete eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion. That this is actually possible, and that's something that is not talked about, at least by any psychologist I know. And so I think it's kind of worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, thank you, Bante. I just say that maybe what those teachers are referring to, though, perhaps could be, aside from the psychological sort of angle, there is a little bit, that take my understanding of the teachings too. Like, we want to be basically we want to create, go from this defiled sort of mediocrely like moral, mediocrely concentrated person. So the mediocrely like pseudo-wise person to actually someone extremely exceptional in that way. So that has also, that you also like feel really good about yourself, like in terms of morality, in terms of like actually going like, I'm like really great that I never kill people, and really great that I never steal, and really great that, no sexual misconduct. Actually, I'm also celibate from time to time, if not at all, like completely, like it's pretty great. I mean, even more awesome. I don't lie, like it's just incapable. I'm incapable of doing that. That's really remarkable. I also don't get intoxicated, and I don't want to get intoxicated. That's fantastic. Look how I am, restrained. So I feel like all of that is a really good, healthy sense of self, in the sense that one doesn't create a conceit of superiority towards others, but actually builds up a really healthy sense of what someone so virtuous is. And similarly, like also attainments in meditation practice, which is not like my jhana is bigger than yours kind of sort of way of thinking, but rather literally really training the mind to be stable, really starting to look at the way things are. And that's very healthy. Like, you're like, wow, I used to be a lot more confused, a lot more uncertain, a lot more just depressed, because I wasn't clearly seeing causality. And now actually everything is becoming clear. So I feel like there is a healthier sense of self as we keep improving in Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. And then as we essentially get the job done, then we understand fully the dependent origination. We fully understand that that's not also who we are. Like, it's just kind of, then we let go of it because, well, we're not hanging onto it anymore. Joe? Did you have any? Yeah.
I was wondering if you, venerables, have contemplated this. I had this wonderful, there's this little quote from another monastery where they were talking about the 4 elements. I've been feeling really inspired by the elements contemplation. And they were relating to the 4 elements, not the 6 that Bante has talked about. They were describing the virtues of the elements. So like the stability of earth, the flexibility in terms of the mind, making the mind stable like earth, and flexible like water, and progressive and striving like wind, and warm-hearted like fire. And I was asking, just for a fun question, like, what are the virtues of space and consciousness in your experience when you contemplate those elements? What do you admire about space and consciousness as a virtue, in a virtuous sense?
I'm trying to understand the question. Like, what do I admire, or what do we admire about the 6 elements, the space and consciousness elements with respect to virtue?
Just for further clarification, Buddha asks us in the Mahavihula Sutta to make our minds like the elements. So make your mind like earth, water, fire, wind, and space. And I'm just looking for inspiration about that in terms of how one makes their mind like the elements.
And so in particular, not just, in particular, you're focusing on the space element and the consciousness.
Yeah, because that wasn't included in that talk. And it was like, I made a promise to a friend that
Got it. So, but in particular, well, I guess what I'm confused by is that, but not the other four elements.
Yeah, no, if you want to focus just on space, like what do you admire about space and consciousness? What do you find virtuous about it? And how does one incline the mind to virtue and those inspired by those elements?
Well, while I haven't particularly practiced much with the space element, when I have the limited practice I've had with the element practices, that basically when we're starting when the effects hopefully can start to have is that one starts to perceive, put more of the perceptions around, for example, earth or solidity, for example. I'll just speak about that, and that is something that doesn't have an inherent personality to it. There's not a, you couldn't, the mind doesn't immediately grasp at a being within earth, right? And so it just doesn't even come up, right? And so when the mind becomes more attuned to that, when you're looking, let's say, being with another body, for example, I'm sitting next to someone, so if the mind is perceiving, right? There's cloth, there's earth element, and there's look at the nails. It's like, oh, that's an earth element, and maybe the skin a little bit more of the water and some heat, right? And so it's what it's trying to do. It's almost kind of decomposing and not giving a chance for that kind of sense of identity, the sense of personality to start to arise. And when there isn't that sense of identity and personality arising, that gives the mind space to not perceive different events that happen in terms of this person wronged me. It's more like, oh, there's elements arising, there's elements passing away, there's elements moving around. If there's maybe if there's an auditory formation happening, right? It's like, oh, there's this vibration, there's these sounds, right? And so there's less of an impulse around wanting to, let's say around virtue, right? There's less of an impulse around, let's say, around creating a misconduct around whether it's to want to do something with another person. The mind is more at ease being with just elements as they are and not having to negotiate the kind of I don't know, all this world of beings and people and somebody doing something and I have to do something in response to that, all that kind of thing, which is often the genesis of, at least from my experience, a lot of tendencies towards, let's say, acting out in an immoral way, right? So it can help those things just not even start to arise because perceptions don't even basically allow for it. So that's one thought. I don't know if the other venerables had any thoughts about the elements or space contemplation with respect to virtue.
I think that's good. Thank you, Bhante. And Mark says, can you speak a bit on what is consciousness in Buddhism and what is awareness or other than consciousness? Bhante Sudasan.
Well, so one thing that's good to keep in mind is that the word consciousness is used in non-Buddhist contexts to mean many different things. So whatever you're used to the word consciousness meaning, just completely forget that. Because that's probably going to, if you bring in an outside definition for consciousness, you're just going to get confused. So consciousness in Buddhism is normally a translation of the word vijnana. And most places in the suttas, the word vijnana is talking about the experience of our sensory world. So chakku vijnana is the experience of a visual world. Sota vijnana is the experience of an auditory world. So it's the experience of seeing, of hearing, of smelling, of tasting, of touching, and the experience of being aware of mental phenomena. So mind consciousness as the sixth. So normally that's what we're talking about. It's the ability to distinguish objects within a sensory field. And actually the word vijnana, so it comes from jnana, which means knowing, and the prefix vi, which means separation or distinction. So vijnana literally means knowing separation. So knowing separate objects, knowing separate phenomena within a field of awareness. As for the word awareness, again, I start thinking of Pali terms. Sampajanya is probably the closest word that we would use for awareness. Sampajanya meaning to be completely aware or completely knowing or completely understanding whatever one is currently experiencing. So, for example, the Buddha said when walking, sitting, standing, or lying down, when eating or drinking or swallowing, when urinating or defecating, when looking this way or that way, we should always do it with sampajanya, which means complete awareness. So being fully aware of what we're doing. So sampajanya then is closely related to sati, mindfulness practice. And actually often when people talk about mindfulness, they're actually talking about sati sampajanya. So this combination of mindfulness with clear and complete awareness. But again, I've also heard the word awareness used in New Agey contexts where it means something not even sure exactly what they're talking about. So again, it's important when coming to Buddhism to forget whatever you're used to these words meaning in other contexts and just try to understand how it's being used in Buddhist context. Otherwise, one can get very confused.
Thank you, Bante. And I think we have a follow-up to what you were saying earlier. Hasanta says, would it be correct to view the noble ones as having khandhas 1 and 2, but not 3 to 5, but none of the factors of dependent origination other than nama, rupa to vedana 4 to 7?
No, that's not correct. No, awakened beings, there's still all 5 khandhas present for as long as an awakened being continues to live. But what's different is there's no longer any desire, attachment, or self-identity in relationship to those things. Like Venerable Jagro was saying a moment ago about seeing the elements as being impersonal. So just part of nature, but not personal, not me, not mine. In the same way, an awakened being, there's still these 5 khandhas here, but they see it as just natural and impersonal. They don't see it as me and mine. They just see it as part of nature. And as for the factors of dependent origination, actually, as I understand it, they would have everything up until grasping, up until craving and grasping. So they still have, well, I guess they don't have ignorance.
Yeah, they don't have.
Yeah, they don't have ignorance, but there's still sankhara operating. There's still vijnana. There's still namarupa. There's still the 6 senses. There's still sense contact. There's still feeling. But there's no ignorance, which means they don't then proceed into desire and grasping. Yep.
Great, thank you, Bante. And Jane says, people in the Buddha's time got to be sotapannas after hearing discourses. So first requirement to become sotapanna is through hearing higher Dhamma. If we have dana and sila, but no monasteries around us, can we get to sotapanna by listening to a digital Dhamma talk? I know, it's always depressing, right? When we, like the suttas are great, but then you were like, oh, wait, there's sotapanna here, there's not returner here. It's like, well, why is this not happening to me? Like, what? Talking about the healthy sense of self from before. It's a bit of a depressing sense of self that can appear sometimes. But yeah, my understanding is, well, first and foremost, I mean, to be actually born at the time of a living Sammasambuddha is the product of like ridiculous good karma. And then in order to be capable to understand, to receive the Dhamma, to be interested in the Dhamma, etc., as we all know, the first sort of attempt at a discourse that the Buddha gave of his proclamation of enlightenment was to another actually spiritual practitioner who was like, yeah, good for you. Yeah, sure. You know, so even a spiritual practitioner, someone who was actually looking for awakening and was born. So he had really like lots of good karmic conditions to begin with. Even that person wasn't capable of understanding, like being there, like having all the perfect conditions. he had a lot of good conditions, but not all perfect. So was not capable of having any sort of realization in front of the Buddha. And it's been 2,600 years or 2,500, according to different different people that count in different ways. And yeah, I mean, we still have a lot of good karma because we still have the teachings of the Buddha, but clearly not as much good karma as being born at a time where there's some Buddha that is in full flesh that can actually give us the teachings. So yeah, there is that component of being born at the time of the Buddha, and also that means that one has done. Obviously, according to Buddhist thought, we don't live only once, but we live countless times. So there's a baggage that we have created, right? And so lots of different people had been spiritual practitioners for quite a long time. So all they needed to do is to actually just listen to some words of Dhamma that would establish the person in right view in that moment, and they could actually could enter easily the stream. So we don't really know, actually. Most of us don't remember past lives, so we don't know really what kind of baggage we have. Some have, maybe a small purse. Some have actually a whole full-on, a 3-bedroom apartment full of stuff, right, that have accumulated. So all we can do is just keep on practicing, and maybe you do have accumulated a lot of suitcases from past lives, and maybe yes, just by listening to a digital Dhamma talk. But bear in mind, you have to pay close attention, being right there, sharp, like it was a matter of life and death. And yeah, maybe in that moment there can be a realization that of really fully understanding the Dhamma. And I really hope the best for you. This being said, try and go and visit monasteries. It's possible. That's what I did. There were no monasteries around me. I went there, and I also built one. Okay, thank you, Rahul.
Can I ask a follow-up question
to this question?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
I've heard elsewhere that one of the reasons is back in the day people weren't as mired in sensuality. They didn't have Netflix, McDonald's, or whatever. Another reason I've heard is all the people back in the day practiced jhanas. They had access to deep states of concentration. This was easy. Do you guys think any of those could hold water?
There were lots of householders actually that go to the Buddha and say, hey, we are super busy, our minds are a mess, we can't really achieve anything. I think we're pumping this a little bit too much, the whole Netflix and and the social media and this and that. I mean, it's just the current way to pass time, to entertain ourselves in this present age. But I feel like since beginningless time, people have always known how to waste time. So I'm I feel like the human species is the foremost at wasting time in all different eras. And I don't know if the other venerables have other thoughts. Yeah.
One thing I maybe just add to this general question, I think the availability of digital Dhamma, I think, is being actually very great, because I mean that's I remember that's how I remember first coming. I think it was Access Insight and just other websites back in the day. That's actually starting to read the Buddhist teachings, and of course later things, videos and YouTube or whatnot, teachers and monastics. It was very powerful and meaningful to me, and that was very. But there's also something I think that's lost in the sense of when something is recorded, and it's recorded, my mind just doesn't quite value it almost the same way. Not all the time, but sometimes, than if somebody were just saying it. And so I think it, to Aya's point, really behooves us to treat anything that we're hearing when somebody's talking about Dhamma and try to remember, oh, wait a minute, don't treat this as if it's just so casually, right? I mean, we have a beautiful library here. We have multiple copies of the Digha Nikaya, the Madhya Nikaya, etc. That we have things on going on YouTube, being streamed all over places, and that's great. But at the same time, there's that kind of complacency can kind of creep in, and so I think it really behooves us to like, oh, wait a minute, I'm treating this too casually. Like, there's something important being said here. So hope that helps.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
One second, Carolina had a question. Go ahead.
Just on the entertainment side. So if I find myself constantly drawn into entertainment, like knowing the Dharma is an option, Enlightenment is an option, and I keep going into entertainment, give wisdom, Netflix, and social media, is it fair to assume that my karma in this life, I probably will need to wait until next one? Because like at what point there is the lost hope?
Shut down your devices and come to the monastery. So if you think your current karma is a mess, well, then start making new karma.
Okay, so that was my question. We can make new karma.
But yeah, that is the whole point of the Buddhist path. Is that actually, yeah, we can, that's the whole point. Basically, the Buddha explains us how things are and empowers us to make appropriate choices rather than random choices where then we kind of get these like mixed results. Some we like, some we don't, and we keep on kind of going a little bit in the dark and following our intuition, which I used to very much. I was very attached to my intuition. I thought I had a really good intuition, and then I encountered the Buddhist teachings and realized I was the uninstructed worldling. And the uninstructed worldling always follows their intuition, which is bad. It's just wrong intuition. And so that's the first preliminary process that we do is essentially correct our view of things, correct our understanding of things. And then start training ourselves to act differently. And that's what we call karma. It's an intentional action. Then the result of karma is vipaka. So that's usually when we say I have good karma or bad karma, we're actually really talking about good vipaka or bad vipaka, which, by the way, the human state to begin with is a product of both good and bad karma. So it's a mixed sort of state to begin with. So we all kind of have good and bad conditions to deal with, but we have all of us here in this room, online, all really incredible conditions to have access to these teachings that are essentially, just kind of, like basically no different than the law of gravity. When people didn't have the law of gravity, it was it's a lot harder. Just even to build a house, build shelter, to actually really understand certain things. So essentially, that's in relation to the physical world, as opposed to the Dhamma is in relation to our mind. So we learn how the mind works, and we're empowered to make choices that lead to happiness rather than to suffering. But this is the whole point. Like, we can actually make karma right here, right now.
Like an addict, like someone who's addicted to drugs, it will be almost like, what would be, like at that point, it's like.
That's why you took the 8 precepts when you came here at the monastery. So here you're detoxing from Netflix. Whether you like it or not, you just can't watch Netflix. Unless you're doing it secretly in the room. But in that case, then an Apama will come and go, Ayasoma, watching Netflix.
I see a lot of homeless people in New York, and they're paying for the drugs. In my perception, lost. And and I was just thinking about how can we help other than taking care of our own mind. But still, I'm always wondering, how can something like that be turned, other than maybe me accepting it as what it is. But it's very hurtful.
You're talking about seeing like addicts on, yeah. No, well, it means if you feel something, it means you have empathy. So it's good. You actually shouldn't. That's what I'm looking for. Don't see that as like a negative. It's actually, oh, you're sensitive to the suffering of others, right? But it's also worth kind of keeping in mind, like, what is this hurt coming from? Sometimes the hurt also might be a mixed bag. There might be, let's say, a sense of like feeling of powerlessness, and maybe that's maybe also what the hurt is about, right? So there may be a sensitivity to suffering of others, but there also might be some like sense of like, oh, I wish I could change this, but I can't, right? And so part of your job, right, is to in any interaction you have is trying to be kind, right, to everybody involved. It's often, I think, one of the things that I think in our culture we get really fixated on is like, is either me or there's you, right? It's me or you, right? But what I encourage you to kind of think about is think about the group of people, like everybody here, as opposed to just me and you. There's a group of people here, right? Or even broader, like, oh, like this group of people. There's maybe a small little insect around the walls. And I think Teddy might be lurking around. Who knows where he is right now? And there might be, Davis also around. You never know. It might be ghosts. All sorts of creatures we're unaware of, right? And so we want to have like think about this as a broader thing. And so there's a being that's suffering, and it's you walking by, right? And you're going, gosh, is there anything? And a lot of times there isn't like anything you can cure out their addiction. But one thing that I know you can do is you can acknowledge that they're a human being, right? Also, sometimes I just practically, I just say hello, good morning. Just acknowledge that they're there, right? And granted, there might be certain circumstances you may not want to necessarily do that, right? Just for practical reasons, safety reasons, right? But you just kind of, just try, they're a human being, you're a human being, they're mega suffering, right? And just don't discount your own empathy. At the same time, try to also understand that there may be some sort of unskillfulness also riding along with that. It feels painful.
Because the one you mentioned also relates to what I wanted to ask Ante about dependent origination.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about what the enlightenment experience is, like what happens to the mind when it becomes awakened, like so as I understand it, like if we lose the sense of self, like say I spontaneously awaken right now in this moment, and I'm looking at Ethan, for example, right? So if there's no sense of me, there's no sense of other, and there would be no alienation, but also there would be no othering from anything in nature. So there would be this feeling of safety. Is that what we're striving towards? Is it alienation that is the ultimate suffering that the self creates, that separateness?
So one caveat that I would make is that in the suttas, the Buddha never goes into a detailed description of what the moment of awakening feels like for any of the 4 stages of awakening. The Buddha's teachings are about how to get there. In terms of the actual experience, he speaks only in extremely vague terms, such as saying Nibbana paramang sukhang. So Nibbana is the paramount happiness, the greatest pleasure. And he says things like it's the absence of greed, hatred, and delusion, the complete cessation of suffering. He talks in these general terms. But in terms of exactly how an awakened being sees other beings, he doesn't actually go into a description of that, except to say that they are naturally completely harmless. They're naturally completely moral. They will never deliberately harm any sentient being. And in fact, in many sutras, the Buddha says an awakened being naturally acts for the benefit of others. But in terms of a detailed description, he doesn't do that anywhere that I'm aware of. So the focus again is on how to reach awakening, not on what awakening feels like or how an awakened being sees the world.
How do we relate that? How do we know what we're striving for if there's no...
That's
we have a lot of questions
and
online.
you're staying at the monastery for a while.
Yeah, so we have
we'll
many
back to it.
chances to talk, but the people online only get once a week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as well as the other friends that are only here for the weekend. You're also welcome to ask questions. And Kumo asks, is right concentration samadhi attaining any one of the lower 1-3 jhanas, or is it completing the 4th jhana? Are the 1 to 4 jhanas the foundation to pursue insight meditation?
As far as I can remember, the Buddha always speaks of the 4 jhanas as a set, with maybe a handful of exceptions where he mentions first jhana on its own, but I think he almost always mentions the 4 as a complete set. Whether that means one needs all 4 is one of these long-standing debates in Buddhism. Though as far as I can tell, it does seem that at least the first jhana is critical. And as one progresses past the lower stages of awakening, then with the elimination of sensual desire and aversion, it seems like one would naturally have easy access to 3rd and 4th jhana. So I think it seems quite likely that by the time one reaches full awakening, one would definitely have developed the 4 jhanas. As for, are the jhanas the foundation to pursue insight meditation? This is clearly stated in several suttas, that the ideal basis for developing insight is the jhanas. So the idea of the so-called dry insight meditation, this idea that one can practice insight meditation without ever developing jhana, this is a apocryphal notion that has no basis in the suttas. It's something that appeared many, many, many centuries after the Buddha. It's not something you'll find in the suttas. So yes, the jhanas are the foundation to deep insight. This is clearly stated in the suttas.
Thank you, Tim. And Rick says, what are ways people can adopt the practice to meet the needs of those who have impairments due to aging, illness, or disabilities?
Adapt the practice. I'm assuming the Buddha's practice to meet the needs of those who have impairments due to aging, illness, and disabilities. I'm trying to think. Well, somebody's interested in the teachings. I'm just trying to think of I'm just trying to imagine a situation. Okay, somebody is interested in the teachings, and they're coming to me, and but let's say they're just really old and frail. They're, I guess, I guess the 2 things that come to mind is being kind and just being really simple. You don't have to go over, the entire Pali Canon. Teach a simple teaching that you think that the person will be receptive to and that they'll be able to hear, right? So you just get a sense for where they're at. You get a sense for what their interests are, right? It may if their interests is meditation, teach some meditation, or maybe share with them a teacher that teaches meditation that you think might be useful, like a guided meditation, or maybe encourage them in sila, right? If that's something that you think they might be interested in, maybe tell them about the story of the Buddha, right? It's a very inspiring story and that might actually arouse a lot of energy and faith in that person. But yeah, I would just encourage you to keep it simple and focus on just being kind. So,
thank you, Bante. Yeah, we just add, keep it simple, but don't dumb it down. That's very important with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's really inspiring because in the canon, actually, I'm just thinking in the Tirigata, that people come start their path on all sorts of points in life, both age, both in terms of physical attitude, physical states. So it's not that just if you're young with one particular, sort of set of conditions, then you know, that is all set for awakening, but rather actually we see that there's this kind of rainbow of experiences of all the different arhats. I think precisely to, really go get the point across that it doesn't matter where we're starting. The important thing is to actually have access to the Dhamma and to practice. So whether we're young, middle-aged, old, like we are where we are, whether, we're weak, feeble, or we're strong, first and foremost, really to sit down, you don't really need to be a bodybuilder. Actually, probably if you're a bodybuilder, you have too many muscles, it's probably uncomfortable. So if you're frail, you're sitting down, that's great. Perfect. Very relaxing. So yeah, I feel like if we get a little bit sometimes too specific with our idea of what the perfect conditions are. Anyway, Laura says, lately I have been feeling disrespected and unappreciated. Is seeking respect and
Appreciation.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm ESL, so sometimes some words are difficult to pronounce. From others only going to cause me more suffering. What should I be seeking instead of respect and appreciation? Is there anything in the suttas about this situation? Well, first and foremost, Laura, I'm very sorry that you're going through this. Is seeking respect and appreciation from others only going to cause you more suffering? Yes. Sorry, bad. It's actually, it's like the perfect recipe when, this comes into being. The natural result is dukkha, more dukkha. And yeah, actually as someone who, now I'll play the bhikkhuni card. Actually, as soon as you enter, any kind of religious institution with this particular body, this respect and unappreciation comes kind of, it's built in the package. It's the small print. And so at the very beginning, I would get really upset. And sometimes I still do, it's not really that pleasant, and I'm clearly unenlightened, so I won't pretend that, it's all kind of just flowing away. But actually, it's nowhere near to where I started. And one of the biggest practices actually is first and foremost, actually, this teaching from Ajahn Pasanno, who is their preceptor, that actually was one of the teachings that really worked in terms of just really kind of addressing this with a lot more wisdom, which is the teaching on patience, on khanti. So we tend to think of patience as this practice of endurance, as kind of like the simile of the saw, right? Everybody is sewing all my limbs, and I'm there. I love you. I love you. I love you. May you all be happy, right? So you're patiently enduring, while also having this mind of loving kindness, and it's a really incredible aspiration, right? So it's the ideal. It's the noble disciple. But, we start as uninstructed worldlings, then we become instructed worldlings, but we're still worldlings. So let's be clear here. We have to be a little bit realistic. So to both kind of patiently endure that and also have loving kindness, it's a little bit unrealistic. Sometimes we actually will be successful as we practice, but sometimes more often than not, actually, it will be quite the opposite. And there will be that sense of sadness of going wow, this really hurts, this is pretty terrible. And so Ajahn Pasanno's teaching offering was to think, instead of this like patient endurance, to actually like really start lowering our level of expectations, so to get it like really as close to inexistent as possible. And actually that really started working. I was like, oh wow, like today, for example, at Empty Cloud Monastery, nobody has spat on my face. It's quite remarkable. It's great. Nobody has actually insulted me that I remember. It's great to have brain fog, sometimes I just forget things. How wonderful, right? So you just like really lower it to the minimum. And so then if someone actually insults you, you're like, oh, I only received one insult instead of two. If you receive two, it's like only two instead of three, and so forth. So like you literally lower it to inexistent. And it actually really works when we take this practice at heart of becoming surprised when actually unpleasant things do not happen, rather than when unpleasant things happen, which is also, extremely bizarre that we are so surprised that unenlightened beings act in unenlightened ways, right? Like it's just so unenlightened of us. Like, oh, it's kind of like those moments when we maybe like do some social justice study, or like we get woke, right? We're not awakened, but we get woke, and any kind of thing. Perhaps it's like we get really aware of animal rights, right? And then we become vegan. And then all of a sudden we're horrified that all the people around us are eating meat and do not understand the plight of animals, while we were doing exactly the same thing a moment ago. Or it's like with any kind of essentially thing that we say, that we realize all of a sudden we have that expectation that everybody should be, like on the same page, should be already there. It's completely unrealistic. And so we really like get all our expectations really high up. Excuse me. So yeah, so I really want to share with you that that practice has really helped me a lot. But also, once again, not bypassing our emotions. So not going, oh, okay, yeah, I'm equanimous. Yes, it's okay. I can bear with this. But rather actually being, so kind to ourselves and go, yeah, this sucks. And is there a way I can avoid this? For example, is this really impacting me in a really bad way? So yeah, sometimes it's not that we have to endure everything all the time. Sometimes we can't avoid it. So if we can't avoid it, well, let's try to kind of stay with it in the most skillful possible way. But if there's a way to avoid it, avoid it. Like if there are these people, you can avoid them. Like don't just go sort of immersing yourself. There's no martyr syndrome, but really just look at your mind, or try to reduce it as much as possible. So this is what comes to mind.
Add one little quick thing. If you have a tendency to feel underappreciated, do your own appreciation practice. If you have a tendency to feel disrespected, start a respect practice. Don't wait for other people to do it. To you, just start practicing. Very intentionally. Find every person you meet or every being you meet. What do you appreciate about this being? What do you respect about this being? Surely you can find something. So.
Aww.
I respect you, Ayasoma.
Thank you. I respect you all. And Hasanta says, actually, if you could read it, sorry.
So the noble ones, sankharas, are neutral sankharas, not pleasant or unpleasant ones. So we don't normally talk about sankharas as pleasant or unpleasant. We talk about sankharas as wholesome or unwholesome sometimes, but sometimes we just talk about sankharas as just being sankharas. So it depends upon whether by sankhara we're talking about mental processes in particular, whether we're talking about sankharas as objects in general. Do you have a
I
comment?
think, I've heard the Goenka tradition use sankharas kind of as not as the way we understand sankharas, but almost like the effects or like manifestations of things. I don't know if anybody is a Goenka practitioner. Do you recall this?
I vaguely remember.
Yeah.
I only did one Goenka retreat,
Yeah.
and I
Anapana,
remember.
maybe?
Okay.
Yeah, I remember he used the word sankara in a bit of a strange way,
Yeah.
but I don't remember the
Yeah.
details.
That was my memory.
I haven't practiced going through it, but I've heard an explanation. So I can vaguely what I've heard is that I don't know how correct this is anymore, but what I've heard people explain is that it's kind of like the sankharas are the feelings that arise that are past karma, and you like are burning them off and kind of being aware of them and becoming autonomous in relation to them. That's what I've heard people explain. It kind of sounds like a little bit Jain or something like that.
Does sound a little bit. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, people sometimes use Pali words in ways other than how they're used in the suttas. So it's very important to understand how these words are used in the suttas. And at least when talking to me, that's the only sense I'm going to be using them in anyway. So in the suttas, sankhara has two main meanings. One is mental objects or mental processes, which would include deliberate thinking or deliberate direction of the mind. And in that case, we can talk about wholesome and unwholesome. And the other main use of sankhara is just to mean things or objects in general. And then we don't really talk about wholesome or unwholesome because things are just things. Like a cushion is not wholesome or unwholesome, it's just a cushion. But yeah, we would never talk about pleasant sankharas, unpleasant sankharas, or neutral sankharas. So unawakened being sankharas, they're just sankharas. When it's sankhara in the sense of activities, then they will always be wholesome. So an awakened being only does wholesome things. This is, again, the Buddha is very clear on this point.
I guess a follow-up based on what just came up and what you described.
I think let's keep those in mind for tomorrow. And
yeah, we still have a lot of questions online. Yeah, we talk every day, so we can talk more tomorrow.
Rick says, what are ways we can take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha to help us when family members actively lie, steal, intake alcohol, intoxicants, and harm us and others? Venerable Jagaro.
Gosh, I forgot what the sutta we were just talking about the other day, but it basically, starts out as like, when others are cruel, we'll train ourselves to be cruel, and it goes through a whole list of different manifestations of unwholesome behavior or of others, and that no matter, withstanding what other people do, we will train ourselves to be wholesome. And then, of course, it goes through other sets, including like even if our minds tend towards, for example, being cruel or unwholesome other ways, we will still train ourselves. So, for example, even if we habitually, watch lots of Netflix, we'll still train ourselves to, focus more on more wholesome activities, right? So, and that's the so that's I think the first thing that comes to mind is that this is a training and it's doable. It's not necessarily easy. It's not necessarily like, but for me, like kind of the prospect of somebody being like, I don't know, I have this habitual tendency, like if somebody's doing something I don't think is right, I want to do something that's even more not right. Kind of like let's get it on. This
You do.
When you think you know someone.
Yeah.
And this isn't so yeah, I don't think this is what the Buddha was trying to teach. And I'm kind of reflecting on this and going, yeah, this is his tendency. And the Buddha's, this is not what his advice is. The Buddha's advice is somebody's being cruel, I'll train myself not be cruel. And it's just coming back to, yeah, okay. So the kind of other things that come to mind. Yeah, I think kind of it was. I don't know if it was Bante or I was mentioning this. Is like, yeah, the thing is, I was mentioning this. It's like, if we can get like in these kind of, we like to get really kind of interested in, let's say, being, we understand the plight of animals, and like now we're like, vegan, and all these things, and then we get really hypercritical of others. But what's the that's not going to help anything, to be kind of very self-righteous and things like that. So it's actually to keep remembering. It's like, oh, like these people, these beings, maybe in this life, or maybe in this life you can relate to that. Maybe you've acted out in these ways. Have you never lied? Have you never stole? Have you never I've definitely taken lots of alcohol and intoxicants. And I've lied and I've stole, I've done all these things. So, yeah, so you're listening to a Buddhist monk giving you advice, and I've done all these things you're talking about. So,
but not anymore. That person doesn't exist anymore, Bante.
I'm training myself, and I've been training myself for a number of years to come out of these tendencies, right? So I am it's true. I'm a different person than I was when I was younger. And so it's to reflect on your own life. Have you been doing these things? Have you ever done these things? Right? Or maybe, maybe there's a past life where you've done some of these things if you haven't done these things before, right? It's to take a broader view of this, and to try to develop a sense of empathy around their condition. So those are a couple of things that come to mind. I don't know if the other venerables have anything you want to add.
Thank you, Bante. And we have fan of Bante Sudaso, who says, Ben says, I greatly admire your Pali pronunciation and live translation. We all do. I'm currently working through Pali for new learners. Do you have any advice or other recommendations for newbies?
Don't give up. So keep practicing every day. Keep studying every day. Set a minimum, like 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day or something. Set a minimum and do it every single day. One thing which can help a lot is to print out a chart of the year, which has a checkbox for every day of the year. And so then every day when you finish your Pali studies, check off that day. Seems like a simple tool, but it's incredible how powerful this is, because if it's getting to be 9 p.m., 10 p.m., and you haven't done your Pali studies yet, there will be an empty box on that chart for the rest of your life, haunting you for your failure. So then you're like, okay, fine, I'll just get out the bloody book and do my 20 minutes, and then I can check off the box.
That works if you're not Italian. It's okay. Well, maybe next year.
So you may need to adjust the strategy for your own particular needs. Find another way. Find a way to guilt yourself into studying. Maybe get your mom to call you up every day and be like, did you study Pali today? Find something. Find some way to motivate yourself to do it every single day. Because that's really the important thing. This is true for any language, not just Pali. But the important thing is to keep practicing every day. And I also recommend to, as soon as possible, which might be today, as soon as possible, start working on going through the suttas in Pali. Even if you have to look up every single word as you go through, still, it's useful. Because then you'll be getting directly in touch with the suttas. So the main reason, in my opinion, the main reason to learn Pali is so you can read the suttas in Pali. So sometimes you think you're not there yet, but actually you're closer than you think. And even just picking up a sutta, like a short sutta, and going through word by word and looking up every single word, you'll learn a lot of Pali, but you'll enjoy it along the way. And you're also reading a sutta. So one of the downsides of many of the Pali study books is they have weird sentences like, the jackal chases the boy to the tree. And it's like, okay, now I know how to say the jackal chases the boy to the tree, but I don't know anything about Buddhism. But if you translate a short sutta, it might be a much more difficult and laborious process, but you're also studying the Buddha's words instead of just studying a language. So that can make it a lot more engaging. So those are my recommendations.
Great, thank you, Bante. And Facebook user says, the hardest thing is to establish a stable and constant mindfulness. From the suttas, I understood that only a peaceful mind can rightly evaluate anatta, and that this is the only right condition for seeing the Dhamma. Your comments about this would be precious. Actually, about this, just, yeah. Would you like to?
This doesn't have anything to do with the previous question.
I know, but the other question was just on Pali. So
oh, okay. Yeah, so recognizing that the two critical bases for our practice are right view and morality. If you want to have constant and stable mindfulness, well, then how's your right view and how's your morality? So start with studying the suttas. Sounds like you're doing that already, which is great. Study the suttas, listen to Dhamma talks, discuss the Dhamma with your spiritual friends, and practice kindness, compassion, respectfulness, courtesy towards every being you encounter. Practice self-restraint, follow the precepts. And all of this will make it much easier for you to maintain stable and constant mindfulness. And also ask yourself what in your life creates distraction or agitation or disturbance in the mind. So maybe it's those violent movies that you like to watch late at night. Or maybe it's the angry political arguments you have with your brother, or whatever it is. Like looking, what is it that generates disturbance or agitation or blurriness or messiness in the mind? And start reducing that from your life. Because often the problem is not actually our mindfulness practice itself. Our problem is everything else we're doing in our life that's disrupting our ability to focus the mind. And stop listening to music. I really can't emphasize this enough. If you want to get anywhere in your meditation practice, stop listening to music. It has to go.
I love the Mexican commentary, like also music. Come on. These Buddhists are crazy. Locos.
Okay.
That's great. The similarities to my culture are just amazing. Dinuri says, hello, Venerables. What are the dangers of holding on to past actions, and what are the dangers of not letting go? A big mass of suffering. That's what the danger of this is. Don't do that, Tinuri. Just don't do that. It also doesn't belong to you. The Buddha says, whatever does not belong to you, abandon it. So this is essentially one of the ways that we actually create that sense of atta, that sense of self. And actually, instead of doing what we were talking about earlier, the creating a sense of wholesome self, a healthy self, to then let go of the self, we actually create a sense of unhealthy self. And then we cling even more to the self, which is really uncomfortable. It's horrible in the beginning, horrible in the middle, and horrible in the end. So we should not do that. What is actually skillful is, if we've done past actions that we're not terribly proud of, what is skillful is to acknowledge that they were unskillful, that they were unwholesome, that they didn't lead to good results, and then abandon them and commit to do something else right here, right now. So what has been done in the past has been done in the past. We can't change that. And there's no need to worry about that. We can only learn from our past actions. So don't. I mean, this whole path is about letting go. So definitely you don't want to cling to anything, even more so things from the past.
But once you recognize that the only thing you're holding on to is suffering, then naturally you'll let go.
Oh, Bhante. And Scott says, a recent reflection on some practices which can be used as suffering management. To uproot defilements, we should understand. Comments would be appreciated. Venerable Jagaro.
Let me read this again. Venerables, because I didn't quite follow and understand. Recent reflection on some practices which can be used as suffering management. Is that a request? Is that what that means? Oh, to uproot. Oh, okay. So it is a request. Okay. To uproot defilements, we should understand suffering management. Do you either of you understand what he means with?
No, I'm actually completely baffled by this one.
Scott, if you can actually re-ask your question, that would be helpful. Rephrase it, yeah. And Richard says, Dear Bhante Sudaso, I sent an email as requested for last Friday's monk chat, asked about devas in dreams versus imagination. You mentioned Buddha spoke on the causes, but couldn't recall the sutta. Did you get it?
So we've actually been on retreat for the entire past week. So no, I haven't been doing such things. But I think we'll talk about it in an upcoming sutta study at some point.
And actually, that was the last of the online questions. So if there is, Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question about boundaries and the intention in the heart when keeping boundaries and making boundaries. You talk about the importance of lowering your expectations, and obviously this is useful when not feeling other people have harmed you, maybe. But I wonder about the importance of having some degree of expectations for how other people should treat you so that you can have boundaries. And maybe I'm mixing the words up. Expectation may not be the right word. But for example, at my job, maybe someone will speak to me, someone will curse at me or spit on me, and I have to tell them, no, that's not appropriate. You can't speak to me that way. Mm-hmm. I'm going to leave the room and I'll come back when you're ready to treat me appropriately. And I recognize that I need to have a pure heart in order to say these things in a pure way. But do you have any other advice for how to hold those expectations in a way that doesn't harm me?
Jagaro?
That's a good question. So, I think what's coming to mind is, from the nature of your question, it does seem like you do have a sense of you do need to communicate something, and you do need to say something. One thing, the way of thinking about this is one. When you're establishing a boundary, often you're thinking about like you're trying to communicate or establish something with somebody else. But almost a preceding step to this is actually, you can almost call it convincing yourself of that there's a boundary need to be established before you even get into the speaking with this other person. So it's actually becoming clear within yourself before you engage with the person that, no, this is important. This needs to, this is, things are acceptable, things are not acceptable with yourself before you engage with the person. So if you're finding yourself kind of, in situations where these sort of things are difficult, I would say like, to the extent that you can be clear in your own mind about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, will greatly help when you're with another person, because it'll come across more clearly, more confidently. You'll be clear in your own mind about what you want or don't want, and what you'll do in response to different situations. And so that preceding step of being very clear within oneself, because of course, in order to be very clear with oneself, one needs to understand where one's coming from, what is important to oneself, and so to the extent that one can the clarity, right, and a peace that one can have, develop that through, the practices that the Buddhist texts we're talking about. those are going to greatly help, I think, trying to figure this out. So this is, not, I realize this isn't too specific with regards to any sort of specific, kind of techniques or anything, but that's what comes to mind. Really getting clear on oneself, and then trying to figure out, okay, what are the appropriate boundaries, and then communicating. I don't know if other venerables have other thoughts.
Well, for me, what has helped is, first of all, distinguishing in my mind the anger or whatever kind of sort of emotional distress that can come when being in sort of situations where there is a kind of abusive sort of situation happening, from the critical thinking. So from the recognizing this is kusala or this is akusala. So usually we tend to, at least this was my experience, that I was like, all right, well, I'm angry because I'm being mistreated. So as a good Buddhist, I should just be here and be a floor mat. Oh yes, yeah, I cut all my limbs, no? As we were saying earlier. But then afterwards I was like, but that was just off. That was like really a bad action that person did. So there was this cognitive dissonance. And essentially what I try to do is always preserving the critical thinking, the intelligent understanding. Okay, this is kusala, this is a kusala action, this is an akusala action. So keeping that well in mind and separating it from the emotional sort of reaction, and then trying to keep on cultivating the understanding this is skillful from this is unskillful, and starving out the emotional sort of reaction. And that helps creating boundaries, not only for other people, but also for myself, in the sense that then I understand, in that place, I'm just not going to go. Like, I'm not going to put myself in that condition, because then sometimes we can also be a little bit reckless in the way that we think, everything has to be endured, everything has to be, like putting ourselves, but that's not what the Buddha says, for example, in the Sabasava Sutta. He doesn't tell us to, if there's like a wild elephant, to go like, oh yes, I love you so much, may you be well and happy, and caress him. No, he says, get the hell out. So that's a boundary. Like, you're like, okay, I'm not going to put, then of course, if I'm in a situation where there is the wild elephant, then I do my best out of the situation if I can't get out of it, but not to get in there. So there's lots of, I find the Sabasava Sutta very useful in the way of like really trying to understand how to create these sort of boundaries while preserving that sense of right and wrong. Because once again, that's understanding what is skillful and unskillful also prevents us from acting unskillfully, and instead acting skillfully with others as well when we are in the sort of more privileged position. I don't know if Dr. Sudaso, you have any?
I think that's good.
Okay.
And Scott has a clarification.
Great.
Scott says, if I put effort into metta to tranquilize the mind, I may become very engaged in this and not engage in the important process of understanding suffering. Any comments?
Yeah, actually, I do have some things. Now that it's been rephrased, I have something to say about this. And actually what comes to mind was when I first went to Abayagiri, they were just starting to build a rather large building. And they actually spent most of the time and expense installing the foundation. So, or to put it in simpler terms, if you consign the construction of a new house, well, the first thing they're going to do is come and dig a big hole. And then you might be like, well, what the heck? I asked for a house, not a big hole. Then they come and they put down a layer of gravel and concrete on the bottom, and you're like, I didn't ask for a big hole with concrete in the bottom. And then they'll start building up walls on the sides of the pit, and you're like, well, I didn't ask for a pit with concrete walls either. And then eventually, once they have a really solid, firm foundation, then they'll start actually building a house. So does it mean that all the foundation work was wasted time? What happens if they just went directly to building the house without making any effort to make a foundation? So in the case of the building they were making at the monastery, they were making this building on the side of a steep hill in very loose, erosion-prone soil in an area that gets earthquakes. So what do you think would have happened if they had skipped the foundation and just gone straight to building the building? Well, last I checked, the building was still there after 15 years, which is probably because they made a really good foundation. Otherwise, it probably would have fallen down the hill a long time ago. So yeah, it's technically true that practicing metta may not lead to a deep breakthrough in understanding suffering. That's technically true. But what it does do is be part of forming a powerful foundation, which makes it possible to understand suffering. So this is related to the earlier question about practicing jhana before attaining insight. So if you want to attain insight, you need a foundation for the mind. You can't just build it on thin air. You need some basis for it. So practicing the various kinds of samatha meditation help to give us the foundation for cultivating insight.
Great, thank you, Bhante. Rahul, yes.
I had a question on a sutta I read this morning in a particular piece of it. I was like, oh, I'm going to see some monks. It's a great time to ask. I read MN 128, Upakilesa Sutta. And there's a particular phrasing that Anuruddha uses when he talks with the Buddha. Me and my buddies, when we practice meditation, we focus on form, rupa, and light, abhasa. And it goes and comes sometimes. And the Buddha talks about like paying attention to the nimitta of form, makes the abhasa go away, and vice versa. And he talks about it being limitless and limited. So I'm curious, like, what is he trying to indicate by form and light here?
I think we should sit down together with the sutta. Since you'll be here for a few days, let's find some time to sit down together and go through the sutta, because we have 3 minutes left. And I think, one, I don't have the sutta in front of me, and two, that's more than a 3-minute question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Wisdoms asks, what is the Dhamma? That's easy, the truth, the way things are. That's very simple. And Julie says, can I offer a meal to the monastery and share merits with my family and ancestors? What impact does this have on my family? Which has more impact, meditation or meal dana? Bhante Jagaro.
Great.
About 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Yes, it has an impact. Let's see. What impact does it have on my family? What specific impact? I don't know. But I have confidence that it'll be a positive impact. Which I'm trying to keep this short. We've got 2 minutes now. Which has more impact, meditation or meal dana? Gosh, I feel like there was this. The Buddha actually talked about this. I think if you properly do meditation, it'll be higher than any giving. But really, I mean, practically do both. And you hedge your bets just to be safe.
Yeah. That was great.
Yeah. Then we have 2 minutes. So yes, Julie Anumadana Sadhu, if you'd like to offer a meal, you can actually write to our Dana coordinator, Benz, at food@emptycloud.org. And we have 2 minutes for one last question. Caroline.
Just going back to the avoiding, like if I've been dealing with someone for years that keeps, like I approach it in multiple ways, but it keeps arising every time I'm with that person. Anger, frustration, and my attempts to not have, what is it, when you don't speak fully about someone, I forgot the precept. You don't do gossiping?
Gossip, yeah.
Or it's impossible. Like when I'm in the presence of that person, I've lost it. It's like, so you're saying avoid that to the extent that it's possible. But is that the right approach? Avoid someone who's triggering that much of you?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. Actually, it was very interesting. I remember going to this teaching of the Karmapa, and actually he extended it to even actually even enlightened beings, I'm not sure if I agree with him on that, but I found it was very interesting. He was highlighting, excuse me, how basically we have to see how the three fires, so greed, hatred, and delusion, were increasing or decreasing whenever we were whenever we were interacting with a person. And so it was not necessarily about the particular characteristics of the person in front of us, but rather what was happening inside of us. So if we have a lot of greed, hatred, and delusion that is triggered, and he was extending it even in front of an enlightened being. So clearly, like, the enlightened being, is not, he's devoid of, they are devoid of greed, hatred, and delusion. So they're clearly not doing anything through body, speech, and mind to trigger that greed, hatred, and delusion inside of us. But because our karmic conditions are so that there is all this turmoil happening, just don't do that. Don't engage in that. So starve that out. So I find that actually very helpful in terms of understanding. Also to gauge that with people sometimes, going like, actually, yeah, like my hatred is really increasing whenever I'm around these people. Maybe I should try to avoid as much as possible. Or even, yeah, like my cravings of this and that. Yeah, but maybe the people are completely fine. It's just that there is something happening. But yeah, when there's clearly unskillful sort of behaviors, I would say avoid as much as possible. All right, 9:01. So we're 1 minute late, but we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And if you're around Empty Cloud Monastery, feel free to come to the monastery this weekend. May you be well and happy.